Let's go to Nashville. This is your most important NASCAR betting stop of the day. It's the Money Stop with Cole Cusumano. I'm Steven Cusumano. Coming off a big week at Loudon, this was a great race, Cole. Christopher Bell, the winner of it. Lots of action for this 1 mile oval. And lo and behold, finishing behind Christopher Bell, it was Chase Briscoe. After he broke the big news earlier in the week that Chase Briscoe is going to go to JGR and race the 19 starting next year. But not to get too carried away, this is the Money Stop presented by Kicking the Tires. Splash and go, Cole. I mean, I kind of gave you my first impressions of this race. I think this race was kind of all over the place. It wasn't our finest hour in terms of, betting, but you got to have those every once in a while. And I think my big takeaway really is just that this was as competitive a short track race and just as much calamity, at least in the short track races we've seen in some time.
For sure. And, looking at our top 10 here, we got 5 of the top 10 drivers, so half the top 10, but the top 4 drivers all correct. I will take that, considering this was our first ever race run on an oval with the wet weather tires and damp conditions. And for that, I think that's why you saw it being wildly unpredictable. But I thought it was an incredible race. I think even with the rain tires, it remained competitive. It remained compelling. It really wasn't that hectic and chaotic. I think that the deserving driver in Christopher Bell definitely won the race. He dominated this thing, had a great car, was able to excel in the dry and the wet conditions. Kudos to NASCAR, by the way, and getting this thing up and running, because there were a lot of fans, including myself, who were pretty upset with how they handled the initial weather that came and the wet weather tires and whatnot. So for them to get it up and going and to see it carried out as successful as it was really, really awesome to see. And as a result, we have back-to-back short track races where the racing's been great. So I'm not sure if I'm ready to say the short track racing is back with the next gen car just yet, just because there was that completely different variable with the wet weather tires. But even before that, I thought the racing was pretty good. You had a lot of strategy at play. It played out very similarly to Iowa in that sense, as well as Bristol when you threw on those the tires and whatnot. So I thought it was a good race. Thought we did a fairly good job with how unpredictable it was. Also got to give myself a pat on the back because my 2 value picks last week, Chase Briscoe and Josh Berry, finished 2-3. Again, mentioned the top 4 finish from our drivers picked last episode. So overall, really fun day and a solid episode.
I think that's the big thing too, is like there was such big unknowns with the wet weather tires, but the fact that we had 2 favorites and 2 value picks finish in the top 4 is pretty damn impressive. And as I look at this top 10, you got Bell, Briscoe, Berry, Larson, Chris Buescher rounded out the top 5, Tyler Reddick 6th, Ricky Stenhouse Jr. 7th once again, John Hunter Nemechek 8th, Martin Truex Jr. was in 9th, another guy we talked about, and then Ross Chastain in 10th. And Ross Chastain was a previous winner at the track we now go to, which is Nashville. Closing the book on Loudon. Like you said, Cole, it was the kind of thing where we had back-to-back competitive short track events, but there were big unknowns at both of those events. So I'll believe it's back when I see it at a place like Martinsville or Bristol or a place that we go to fairly often. So without further ado, Cole, let's take it to the bank here and talk about this race at Nashville. Take it to the bank. Our pre-qualifying odds start with none other than Kyle Larson, plus 425 for the race win. Denny Hamlin, plus 550 at Nashville. Christopher Bell, last week's winner, at plus 700. Martin Truex Jr., plus 750. And then the aforementioned Ross Chastain rounds out the top 5 at plus 850 odds. So, Cole, without further ado, kick off the favorites this week.
Definitely. We'll kick it off with the king of the intermediate tracks in 2024 and in the next-gen era, I would say, in Kyle Larson, who is, again, plus 425 for the race win as the odds-on favorite and the most expensive driver in DFS at $10,500. Kyle Larson scored his series-best 8th top 5 at Loudon this past weekend. He is now once again tied for the points lead with Chase Elliott, with the 3rd-best average finish and the most laps led. Back to the intermediate tracks, though, he has the most wins with 2, over 340 laps led between all 6 starts. Those are all series bests. And then looking at Nashville, he won the inaugural race here back in 2021. He's finished top 5 in all 3 starts, one of 2 drivers to do so, with the 5th place finish coming in here last year in 2023. So for that, Kyle Larson is obviously the odds-on favorite to win the Ally 400 at Nashville. But another guy who has an equally as good a shot is Denny Hamlin, who's plus 550 for the race win and $10,300 for DFS, which is the second most expensive behind Kyle Larson. And the reason he is the second behind Kyle Larson is because the slump continues. Denny Hamlin now has 3 straight finishes of 24th or worse this season. However, he did lead over 40 laps at Loudon last week, so the speed is still very much on his side. And then looking at his intermediate track record here in 2024, he's led laps in all but 2 starts and finished top 10 in all but 1 of those. That includes 3 top 5s with a runner-up as well. And looking at Nashville, he's got 2 top 10s, a best finish of 3rd, which came last year, and 195 laps led over his last 2 starts, which is the second most in the series. Kyle Larson actually has the most laps led at Nashville, but that all came in his win in 2021. So looking at the someone who's led more laps over a greater sample size, you're looking at Denny Hamlin. Denny Hamlin's also, we mentioned him about 16 races into this season where he led a lap in every single race this season. That streak has now stopped, but nonetheless, he's been one of the best cars all year, along with Kyle Larson. For that, these are my 2 favorites for the Ally 400 at Nashville.
So you got the first 2 drivers in odds. I'm going to take the 3rd highest driver, and that is Christopher Bell, who is the winner last weekend. I mean, there's one thing we know about Christopher Bell. It's when he's hot, he is hot. When he's not, he can be inconsistent, but he's at the top of his game right now, a 5-race top 10 streak, bookended by the win at the Coke 600, which was an intermediate track, and the win at New Hampshire. Tied for a series best 11 top 10s now. Had that win at Charlotte, but remember, that was a rain-shortened race, so take that for what it's worth. Led 90 laps there. He does have top 10s in half of his intermediate starts with 3 out of the 6. And the thing with Christopher Bell at Nashville is that he's gotten better with every start there. He's, in this order, finished 9th, 8th, and 7th. So he's due for a top 5. He's due for a potential win. That's why he's favored by Vegas to be in the top 3 in odds. He's valued at $10,000 in daily fantasy and probably worth that price because, like we've talked about a lot with him. I mean, he can be a hot and cold driver sometimes, but when he's hot, there aren't many better drivers in the garage, and that is definitely the case right now. From him to a guy that's been hot literally all season and quietly having, honestly, one of the best seasons of his career, Chase Elliott, 5th best in odds, plus 900. In daily fantasy is 9,700, so plus 900 actually puts him just outside the top 5. So you can make the argument he's the best value out of these favorites picks. And why has Chase Elliott been one of the best in the garage this year? Well, he hasn't finished outside the top 20 in any of the 18 races this season. We're halfway through now, and he's been the most consistent driver. A 9.6 average finish. He's led laps over his last 3 starts. He is also tied for the points lead. And in terms of intermediate tracks, won at Texas, and he's had top 15s at every other intermediate track this year for an average finish of 8. So for what's been an extremely consistent season for Chase Elliott, the intermediates have been his best tracks. He's got 2 top 5s, including a win at Nashville, that would 2022, and he's one of 2 drivers to have led a lap in all 3 of his starts at Nashville. So couple all that up with the fact that he has been the most consistent driver in the garage. The intermediates have been his best tracks, and he has been one of the best in the sport at Nashville. Give me a whole lot of Chase Elliott this week. I'm buying in on the fact that he is the cheapest of these favorites, and I'm going to ride that Christopher Bell hand until he's not hot anymore. So feeling pretty good about those favorites. The only one that gives me a little bit of cause for concern is Denny, just with the 3 straight poor finishes. But like you talked about, I mean, he's still Denny. He still has some of the best speed in the garage. And you know that streak is not going to continue for an extended period of time. So without further ado, Cole, let's move it on to the sleepers, and starting with a guy that's actually in the top 5 in Vegas's odds.
Yes, we're going to go with Ross Chastain here. And Ross Chastain actually made the jump into the top 5 as of today because he was 6th yesterday. So he is, again, plus 850 for the race win and $9,000 for DFS. And he is, without a doubt, the best value in the field this weekend. Coming off his 7th top 10 of the season at Loudon, which was his 3rd over his last 5 starts, which is important to note because over his last 6 starts, he's finished top 15 with a 9.5 average in that span. And for that, it's now put him back in that conversation for being one of the most consistent drivers all season as the 2nd best overall average finish at 12.3. So Ross Chastain, I mentioned it a few weeks back, maybe even to start the month off. Summer is when Ross Chastain heats up. It's when you eat your watermelon. It's when the Melon Man turns it on. He won at Nashville last year, And he is the other driver alluded to with Kyle Larson, who has a win and top 5 in all 3 starts here. Mentioned the win last year, finished runner-up in 2021. He actually has better stats compared to Kyle Larson in that regard. Maybe not as much laps led, but in terms of results, there's been nobody better than Ross Chastain at Nashville. So for that, he's got to be the best value in the field this week again at $9,000 for DFS and $850 for the race win. From there, the sleepers category, it's a little bit muddled because there's a very, very thin line between your favorites and your value picks. There's not a whole lot of leeway. There's maybe about 6 drivers to choose from. And I think my next best option personally is going to be Ty Gibbs. Obviously, some uncertainty there given his bit of a sophomore slump he's in right now, which is a 4-race top 10 drought. He's actually plus 2,200 for the race win, and he's valued at $8,400 for DFS. But I like Ty Gibbs this weekend because even though he is riding that 4-race top 10 drought, he finished 11th at Gateway, which was another intermediate track. And prior to that, he had finishes as 2nd and 6th at Darlington and Charlotte, which are 2 intermediate tracks as well. And in regard to the intermediate tracks in 2024, he only has 1 finish lower than 13th in all those 6 starts. So he's been really good in these style tracks. Prior to this current drought, he's been really, really consistent. He was one of the more consistent drivers through the first 10 starts this season. That doesn't just go away. And Ty Gibbs is a very talented driver. I think he's going to have a very strong race this weekend. He finished 14th in his only Cup start at Nashville. So that's pretty encouraging considering he's finished top 15 in 5 of the 6 other starts this season at those style tracks. So I like Ty Gibbs a lot. Also finished 4th in the Xfinity Series here. Laps led in both starts. So maybe not as much optimism as Ross Chastain, but I think Ty Gibbs will be a very serviceable pick for DFS this weekend.
Looking at some other sleepers, Cole, that I feel like most weeks are not sleepers, but you could make the case that this week they are. I want to start with Joey Logano and the fact that he has looked really sporty the last few weeks, but didn't have the finish to reflect that at Loudon. Another bad finish, 32nd, but he was running up front prior to the issues, and he's now plus 13 in the standings after he was under the cut line. You know that we're nearing the end of the regular season now as we get into July and eventually August. They got to turn up the heat, and after a late issue for Bubba Wallace last week, which was not of his doing, Joey finds himself 13 points to the good, but you know that they want to find some security and get a win. And you look at Joey at Nashville, he's had top 10s in each of his 2 starts there with a best of 9th. He did have a 19th place finish there last year, but an average running position inside the top 15. So I'm looking at a time of the year right now where the Fords have really come into their own. I know Christopher Bell won at New Hampshire last week, but last several weeks, the Fords have been some of the best cars in the garage. And Joey Logano has been one of the guys leading that charge, whether he's had the finishes to reflect that or not. So look at a guy that is definitely flying under the radar because he's only valued at plus 2,000 for the race win. But 86 at Daily Fantasy is a really solid value in my book. And I think it's a matter of time before Joey has the result that reflects how good this team's been running recently. Another guy, Cole, that he's been one of the best in the sport all season, but has run into a little bit of a rough patch, is William Byron. He has plus 1,000 for the win, 9,500 in Daily Fantasy, and after a really tough stretch, including a 24th last week at Loudon, Willie B is down to 7th in the standings, and you got to go back over a month to the last time he had top 10s in back-to-back races, so he's really struggling to find some consistency. Prior to that streak of back-to-back top 10s, his last really good stretch, which was 5 straight top 10s, you got to go all the way back to late April, so he hasn't had the summer, or at least the start to the summer, that team would like to have seen. But he did finish 3rd in the inaugural race at Nashville, finished 6th there last year. And I think that you look at this team, the 24 team, as one of the best consistently at the intermediate tracks. And I see them finding success at Nashville this week. But again, it's a guy that's usually in the favorites, but with inconsistency over the summer, there's a reason he's a sleeper this week. So I'm going to go with a couple guys that have a really good outside chance at winning, and that is Joey Logano and William Byron. So there's definitely some good value that we've discussed over these favorites and sleepers. But in terms of daily fantasy value, Cole, a couple other value picks in the field this week that cannot go unnoticed.
For sure. I think that has to begin with Carson Hocevar, who's valued at $6,100. We have screamed his name from the mountaintops pretty much the entire season. He's been a top 20 car all year. He's been a top 20 car his last 4 starts. Lowest finished a 17th in that span, which happened twice, including this past weekend at Loudon. And those other 2 starts, he finished 8th at Gateway and 14th at Iowa. So those are, again, intermediate tracks. And you look at what he's done at Nashville in the Truck Series. He won there last year and finished 3rd the prior year in 2022. So Carson Hocevar, somebody who knows how to get around Nashville. He won there last year. He's had top 20 speed all year and top 15 speed, at the intermediate track. So I like him a lot this weekend. We've liked him a lot all season for a value pick. And there's no reason why he shouldn't be in your lineup. For my final driver I'm going to pick for value, it's going to be Eric Jones at $6,600. And Eric Jones is coming off a 13th place finish at Loudon, which was his best finish since returning from injury after that crash where he hurt his back. And actually, he's finished top 20 in 4 of his 6 starts since returning as well. So he hasn't been performing as bad as other drivers who've had injuries of this caliber, like Eric Amarola or Alex Bowman in recent memory. So that's really encouraging for me. On top of the fact that he's finished top 20 in all 3 Nashville starts and only gotten progressively better, he finished 11th in 2022 and finished top 10 and 8th last year. So Eric Jones, I know he's flown very under the radar, but he's had the results at Nashville, top 20s in all 3 starts. He's had top 20 speed since coming back from that back injury. So I like him as a really good sneaky pick for this week.
So there's some really good value to be had this week. I mean, those are 2 great picks alone. And the 2 guys I'm going to name are actually even cheaper than that. So you're talking about some really good options at the back end of a DFS lineup, which we'll get to in a second. But I'm going to keep this pretty short and sweet. The cheapest driver available that we like is Corey LaJoie. He's only at $5,500. However, he's at top 20s in all 3 starts he's made at Nashville and a best finish of 15th. So I don't know why Corey LaJoie would be valued at $5,500. I mean, I know the results haven't been there this season, but it's a guy that's hasn't been really a top 20 driver for the entirety of his career. There's been certain stretches, of course, but the fact that he's finished top 20 relative to the rest of his results at Nashville in 3 starts there definitely has my attention, and especially at that price range. Also, for Austin Dillon, you're talking about a guy that is valued at $5,700. So if you wanted to splurge a little bit and go above Corey LaJoie's value, Dillon won in the Truck Series at Nashville previously in his career, and you talk about a guy with great success in the Cup Series, top 15s in all 3 starts at Nashville with a best of 12th. So for LaJoie and Dillon, they're both valued under $6,000 in daily fantasy for some reason. And they've both had, in the case of LaJoie, top 20s in all 3 starts, and in the case of Austin Dillon, top 15s in all 3 starts. So you can go with a couple of aces this week at the top of your lineup. Look at how they qualify, look at how the practice times go, and you could potentially fit both Kyle Larson and a guy like Christopher Bell in your lineup, and then compensate for it and feel decently well about Corey LaJoie and or Austin Dillon. So I'm feeling good about those values, Cole, both the 2 you named and the 2 I named. But as we just named 12 drivers, let's get this down to 6, give you a better idea of who we're kind of focusing in on, and we'll each pick 1 driver per tier, starting with you.
I'm going to go Chevy heavy with Kyle Larson as my favorite, Ross Chastain as my sleeper, and Carson Hocevar as my value pick.
I am going to go with the Toyota C-Bell as my favorite. I will take Joey Logano from the sleepers category, and out of my values, let's go with Corey LaJoie. Now, as for big money bets, Cole, let's talk about some prop bets here, because we've talked about some of the values that we like. A lot of times, those will carry into the top 5s and the top 10s. So let's discuss this here. Top 5 finisher odds, I'm looking at anybody from a guy like Chase Elliott down, and even Christopher Bell. They're both at even money, plus 100, to finish in the top 5. I would consider those big money bets, especially when you consider how consistent C-Bell and Chase Elliott have been. That's where my eye initially leads, but there's definitely some other prop bet values to be had this week.
That C-Bell value is really good. Actually, on BetMGM, he's not above even, so he's actually favored to get a top 5. So that's a really good one. Was that on DraftKings where you found that one?
DraftKings, yeah.
Awesome value, very good. For me, I went to BetMGM because they usually have the better values. That was the case for Chase Elliott to finish top 5. He was plus 120. Love that value for someone who's finished top 5 there 2 times in the Cup Series, and who's been one of the best drivers all season. Same can be said about Ross Chastain. Ross Chastain to finish top 5 is plus 115. For someone who's done that in all 3 starts and got the win there last year, seems like almost a no-brainer. And then for my final big money bet, we did not mention this one yet, but Chevy is undefeated at Nashville in the Cup Series. They are plus 120 to get the win. And circling back to last week, we were very high on the Toyotas. I believe they were plus 110 to get the win, and they sure enough are now 4-0 or 3-0 in the next-gen car. So I like those three quite a bit, but especially the Chevy manufacturer win at plus 120.
Very underrated one there. I was eyeing that too, actually, and you mentioned the fact that they're undefeated at Nashville, so those are very solid big money bets. And I want to go through a few head-to-head matchups as well, Cole. See what we've got this week on that front for Nashville. And I'll rattle these off per usual. Give me your thoughts. So we've got Seabell versus William Byron. You got Chastain versus Truex. Hamlin versus Elliott. Josh Berry versus Chase Briscoe. And Chris Buescher versus Tyler Reddick.
All right. So this is a pretty interesting weekend because I think there are some ways you can go with this. The ones that jump off the page to me immediately are Bell over Byron. I mean, just seeing the stretch that Bell's on right now, it just makes a whole lot of sense to pick him over Byron, especially given Byron's current stretch and Byron's results compared to Bell's at Nashville in the Cup Series. So he is minus 160 to finish above William Byron. That's favored. I like Chastain over Truex a lot for obvious reasons. Chastain's been one of the best drivers, if not the best driver at Nashville in the Cup Series. Truex is definitely slumping. I know he got the top 10 last week. That broke a little bit of a drought, though, and he's just not been at the top of his game currently. Ross Chastain's actually not favored to finish above Truex. He's at even, plus 100, so that in itself could be a big money bet. From there, I feel like Hamlin and Elliott can kind of go either way. I think the Berry and Briscoe one can go either way as well, considering how both drivers have been over this last 3-4 races. And both Buescher and Reddick have not done well at Nashville in the next gen or in the Cup Series, so I would stay away from that. So looking at the ones I have here that I did like, Bell over Byron, Chastain over Truex, that comes out to plus 225 odds with a $10 bet. You get a $32.50 payout. So pretty decent haul there. Like I said, you could even go about doing Ross Chastain over Truex for a big money bet in itself at plus 100. So there is some value this week with the head-to-head bets.
I want to go through DFS lineups now as well, Cole, because like we've talked about quite a bit, there's some value to be had this week, and I think you and I are on the same page with a few of the key drivers. I feel like at 9,000, Ross Chastain has got to be a linchpin for your lineup this week. I like your lineup better than the one I put together this week, so why don't you kind of roll through what you came up with? And, you know, there's, like I said before, just from a general lineup perspective, there's good enough value to where you can afford multiple aces. And you can afford a guy like Ross Chastain at a price range that really isn't one worthy of being an ace at 9,000. I think that he's not even the most expensive driver in the lineup.
Yep, and that's how I went about constructing this, was I went immediately to Ross Chastain at $9,000. That value is way too good to pass up. If he's not in your lineup, you're doing it wrong. You're going to lose money. It's a lost cause. So put him in your lineup immediately. From there, I actually went down to Carson Hocevar at $6,100. Again, I just like what I've seen from this kid the entire season, especially on the intermediate tracks. So I like that quite a bit. On top of him obviously having a win already at Nashville in the Truck Series. That's a big deal for me. And then from there, my most expensive driver I had in my lineup was Chase Elliott at $9,700. He's a previous winner here as well. He's been a top 20 car the entire season, best average finish, tied for the points lead. Not a whole lot else to say on Chase Elliott and how great he's been in 2024. I would say that between Kyle Larson, Chase Elliott, and Ross Chastain, they have been the three best drivers by far and away at Nashville in the Cup Series. After Chase Elliott and Ross Chastain, who were $9,700 and $9,000 once again, I went with Joey Logano. Again, just somebody who needs to have a good run. Someone who has had a lot of speed. He had one of the best cars earlier in the running at Loudon and then just kind of played himself and got into Chase Elliott, took them both out. But he's back in the hunt now in the playoffs. He's above the cutoff. I think they're due for a really good result, and I think that very well could come here at Nashville in the form of a top 5 finish. So give me Logano at $8,600. After that, someone who I did not mention actually is Daniel Suarez. Now I want to pull up his stats really quickly here because I didn't put him on this episode only because We had him on last week, and we had him on a few weeks before that, and he's kind of proven us wrong. So I feel like fool me once, shame on me, fool me twice. It's like you gotta wait till the results start coming in. And he did not have a good day at Loudon. However, he still has been really good at Nashville. And just having the success from Ross Chastain and the magnitude that it's come in, I think that you can kind of parlay that into some success with Daniel Suarez and what he's done here in the past for himself. So he's finished top 15 in all 3 starts. Best finished the 7th in the first race in 2021. And then finished 15th 2022, 12th last year. So he's been really consistent here. He's been a top 15 car. And I think just factoring in again, Ross Chastain's success along with Daniel Suarez's speed, it should be a solid top 10, minimum top 15 day for that team. And finally, going to round out this lineup with Ty Gibbs at $8,400. Again, finished 14th here in his Lone Cup start, has a 4th place finish in the Xfinity Series, and he's somebody who's done very well in the intermediate tracks in 2024, and collectively throughout his entire career. So I think my lineup, there's a lot of consistency. However, I like how your lineup has Kyle Larson in it, and I know you're going to get to that in a second. So I think before practice and qualifying, this lineup looks really, really good. But as you mentioned, always wait until the practice and qualifying plays out. Then you can plan accordingly with your ace in the hole, because there is a lot of ways you can go with some value picks in Austin Dillon or Corey LaJoie. So who do you got, Steven?
Yeah, I like the idea of kind of having 2 different directions to go, because, we always discuss these to give you as much time in advance before locking in your bets on like what the numbers indicate before practice and qualifying. So I think it's good to have options, but I constructed my lineup in that same fashion of having 2 aces. I picked Kyle Larson and Christopher Bell. I think you could very easily take Chase Elliott as well based off his results here, but I had basically 3 aces. And I mentioned I see Ross Chastain as a guy who is going to be a top 5, potentially race-winning driver at a value of $9,000. So I've got Bell, Chastain, and Larson, 3 of my favorite drivers, period, in the field. And then my 4th best driver is Ty Gibbs. And I had the idea of taking a couple of our value picks, Eric Jones at $6,600 and Corey LaJoie at $5,500 to round out the lineup. So I think that there's such a high ceiling for those 4 drivers, Bell, Chastain, Gibbs, and Larson, and such a high floor for the other 2 in Jones and LaJoie, that I feel really good about this lineup too. It is time now, Cole, to put our money where our mouth is. Race winners, race sleepers at Nashville this week. I got to say, this is a track I've really come to enjoy. Out of the new ones that have been added to the circuit recently, this is one I've really, really liked the racing at. And lo and behold, it is my turn to pick first this week for a race winner. And for this week, I'm going to go with Kyle Larson. I know we talked a lot about how much we love Chase Elliott, how much we love Ross Chastain at Nashville, but I just think that if you're not picking a Chevy to win, at least based on what we've seen so far, probably not doing it right. And I can't help but pick the best Chevy driver in Kyle Larson this week. I will take the low-hanging fruit.
I don't blame you. I would definitely go with Kyle Larson as well. One thing I didn't mention during the analysis, and one, I guess, caution I want to throw out there with Kyle Larson, he leaves the series in top 5. We mentioned that with 8 in the season. But there's a certain volatility that comes with Kyle Larson, because if he's not getting a top 5, he's probably going to get DNF, and he's proven that on a few occasions, even at the intermediate tracks. So a little caution there. I think the speed's obviously always going to be there, but there is some volatility with that. Either way, he is the race winner pick you want to make for this week, I think. For me, I'll start with my sleeper. I'm going to go with Daniel Suarez. I just think, like I said with the DFS analysis just now, I think there is something palpable with his prior top 15 success here, as well as Ross Chastain's dominance at this track in the Cup Series. So I like taking a chance on him for a top 10 day. And for my winner, I'm going to go with Chase Elliott. I feel like Ross Chastain's the obvious answer, and he has the results to back that up. But I think collectively in 2024, you could make the case that there's been nobody better outside of maybe Kyle Larson, Denny Hamlin than Chase Elliott. And even then, there's been nobody more consistent than Chase Elliott. And I just like what I've seen from this driver at this track in the Cup Series. He has the 2 top 5s, including the win. And then there was the one finish where he got disqualified. He would have gotten 13th, but he had 5 loose lug nuts. So either way, he's had a lot of speed at this track. He's had a lot of speed all season. And for that, give me Chase Elliott for the race win.
Yeah, those are the two I was between. If it wasn't going to be Chase or Larson for me, it was going to be Chase. I have a tough time picking Ross, even though he's been the best driver here. I have a tough time picking him just with how inconsistent the results have been this year. But this has been a fun one, Cole. This will be, man, we're short and sweet today, right around 30 minutes. Ally 400, it's going to be this upcoming Sunday, 3:30 p.m. Eastern Time. Any parting words for us before we go this week?
I just wanted to say, no, I mean, this is a very short and succinct episode. I think it came out actually excellent, and I'm very excited for this weekend at Nashville. I just want to echo what you said. Since making its, turn in the Cup Series circuit, it's become one of my favorite tracks as well. It's a very unique track with the concrete. I think it races incredible. There's a lot of passing, a lot of madness that usually ensues. So I'm really excited about this race. It should be a fun one.
Well, per usual, we come to you on what's usually a Thursday. We give you all the numbers, all the analysis based on prior results, because we don't want to get lost in all the practice and qualifying that happens. And I think it's important to have these numbers and these trends and these instincts kind of in your mind ahead of that, but not to lock in any bets unless there's value to be had until you see what happens on the track. So there's still a lot to be happening on that front. And per usual, keep it tuned to social media at _MoneyStop, Cole's social media, my social media, where we'll have all kinds of great updates on developing storyline throughout the week and drivers that become, guys who we maybe didn't even touch on at all during this episode that you might want to have your eye on. So keep it tuned on social media. Continue to subscribe, comment, like, all those great things. Rate us on Apple Podcasts and all that fun stuff.
I did want to add one more thing. I am going to Chicago next weekend for the street course race, so should have a really fun show lined up for that. And looking forward to getting out there and getting some really good content on the Money Stop's social media accounts at _MoneyStop.
Yeah, that's going to be great. I actually went to Chicago for the first time this offseason. Fantastic city. Can't recommend it enough. So excited you're making that trip, both for personal reasons, but also to be at the track. The street course is going to be so sick to see, and it'll be another fun one, another fun week of content leading up to next week's race at Chicago. So without further ado, we will drop the jack here on the most important NASCAR betting stop of the day. He's Cole, I'm Steven, and as we head off, we will see you next week ahead of the Chicago street course.